Welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast, the podcast that empowers you to take control of your education. Featuring weekly interviews with influencers in the world of education, as well as tutoring tips, lessons, and updates. And now, here's your host, Alexis Avila.
Welcome back to the Prepped and Polished podcast. Make sure to check us out on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and Instagram. On Instagram, we're Prepped and Polished 1. And check out our website, preppedandpolished.com, for more information. And when you're on the site, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel on the bottom of the site, where you can access over 100 educational and tutoring tips videos. You can submit a question to radio@preppedandpolished.com. Let's get to today's guest. Today's guest is Carrie Clark, founder of speechandlanguagekids.com, a leading online resource for information and activities on all types of speech and language delays, disorders, and therapies that you can use to improve communication in your child or the students you work with. Carrie is a speech and language pathologist who runs her private practice in Columbia, Missouri, and spends a lot of time on her website. On today's show, Carrie will give you fresh ideas for parents and professionals working with students with speech language challenges and share her best tips for working with students with speech and language challenges. Carrie, thanks for coming on the Prepped and Polished podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you help students with speech and language issues.
Sure. I am a speech-language pathologist by trade. I went to undergraduate and graduate school for communication disorders, graduated with that degree, and went into the field of speech pathology. And I worked at the public schools for about 4 years doing speech therapy with kiddos, mostly ages 3 through 5 years. But I worked within a team of speech therapists that were serving the entire district, so had some older kids in there as well. I just mostly focused on those younger kids. So I did that for about 4 years and then decided to kind of strike out on my own, and I started a private practice where I helped children of all ages in the Columbia, Missouri area. That's where I'm located, and did some speech therapy, language therapy, worked with kiddos with autism, just about any kind of communication problem, I've dealt with it. So I've been doing that for a couple years now, and then on the side, I also started a website, which is speechandlanguagekids.com, and my main goal with that website was to be able to basically reach farther and help more people than I can just help in my office here in Columbia. So through the website, I offer information products such as ebooks and training courses, but also a lot of free information in terms of blog posts and videos, and it's all very much how to help a child with certain language or speech problems. So how to help a kiddo who has a lisp, or how to help a kiddo who's stuttering. And I just started putting out content about different speech and language disorders, and people really seemed to appreciate the very practical how-to guides. I have a lot of parents that come on looking for help for their kids, and then also a lot of speech therapists who are looking for different strategies to try in therapy as well.
So you talked about my next question, which was just what prompted you to start your online resource, speechandlanguagekids.com. Can you tell us a little bit about a little bit more about some of the stuff you'll find on the website? There's a lot of information on there.
Yes, yes, there is. And after starting it and kind of getting into it, I part of me wonders if maybe I should have gone a little smaller niche. But basically, it targets any sort of communication problems that a child may have. So I found that the easiest way to kind of organize that was on the main page of the website. If you scroll down, there's a bunch of different boxes or squares, and they all focus on a different area. So there's one that says autism, there's one that says expressive language delay, there's one that says speech sound errors. And if you click on one of those topics, then it'll take you to a page that answers a lot of the common questions and then gives you links to specific articles. So for example, on the expressive language page, I have information about how to help children who are having problems with grammar, or how to help with writing skills, or how to help with reading skills. And so you can really kind of niche down into exactly what skill the child is having problems with. And I've got how-to guides on I think, hundreds of different topics on the website right now. I pretty much put a new one out every week, and I've been doing this for almost 3 years. So there's a ton of content on there about all sorts of different speech and language problems that kiddos may be having.
It's amazing. I'm looking at it now. Okay, so you have over 19,000 people on your email list.
Yes.
So are you surprised by how many people are seeking good, valuable information to help their children with speech and language issues? Or
honestly, I am a little. Because I got into this because I knew that there were people out there that were looking for this. But I don't know. It just seems like there are a lot of parents who maybe their kid has some problems, but they just kind of overlook it, or life gets in the way. They're very busy. They just don't have time or energy to put towards helping their children. So the fact that I have so many people saying, my kid's in therapy, but I want more. I want to help them more. I want to help them faster. What can I do? It astounds me, like, that there are so many amazing parents out there that are really doing everything that they possibly can to help their children. And it seems to me that a lot of them are just feeling completely overwhelmed and lost with the information that is online. Most of the information online is not parent-friendly, so it's very hard to read through an article of research and figure out what that means you should do with your child. So I try to make everything on my website extremely parent-friendly. I don't use a whole lot of jargon or technical terms. I don't cite a bunch of research in terms of these were the statistics. I say the research says you should do this, and I give very practical advice.
That's amazing. What are some of the main challenges students with speech and language issues face? I mean, I'm sure it's complicated, but what are just some of the general ones?
Sure. And that is very specific on what kinds of problems the child is having. I will say that kind of one of the biggest themes that we see is that a child with speech and language problems, as they are developing speech and language, so the early years, those kids are at a much higher risk for having reading problems later on. And so that's something that we always have to be watching for, is reading problems that go along with whatever other speech and language problems that child had. But then as they get older, these children who had maybe some speech and language problems as a child, maybe they recovered enough to have some pretty functional communication. They're able to communicate with the people around them well. But then as they get older, they may have trouble with something like figurative language, where people are using figurative language instead of exactly saying what they mean. Like, it's raining cats and dogs, and the student's thinking, where are the cats and dogs?
Sure.
So having issues even after the main speech and language problems are resolved, maybe they still have some of that residual stuff, or problems with reading or writing, or even just listening to a teacher giving a lecture on something and being able to take that information that the teacher says, write it down in notes that make sense, and then use those notes to study for a test. So you may be able to fix the main problems early on, but there are still other things that you need to watch for as they get older.
Are students born with a speech and language obstacle, or is it acquired? Or is it learned, or both?
It's kind of both, and it's kind of not necessarily one or the other. So there is some beginning research going on about what is causing speech and language problems, and I will say, by and large, for most children, we just don't know. But what the research is suggesting is that certain children may have a tendency kind of born in of that they are more at risk of having speech and language problems, and then certain environmental factors can turn those on or off. So, for example, reading to your child when they're very young is a very good way to improve language skills. So if a child had that kind of a tendency to already have speech and language problems, and then they weren't read to, and maybe there were some other factors going on, then they're more likely to have problems than the same child who had been read to. So, that's kind of cutting it a little too black and white, because obviously there are many, many children who have speech and language problems who were read to as children, and so it's not necessarily it's the fault of this condition or this environment. It's kind of everything factoring together. And, then again, there are some children who really are born with some very large disabilities in terms of communication, and those just are, no matter the environmental factors, they're going to have those problems.
There's just a whole spectrum of issues we're talking about, and that's what makes your site so effective. Yes. There's so many activities.
Yes, and it has to be that way because there are so many different types of problems out there and different types of approaches to treat those problems. So it's helpful to have kind of an arsenal, which is why I think so many speech therapists like my site, because it's like, well, I have a couple ways to treat that, but now I have another one.
It's amazing. What's a fun activity you can do at home if you're a parent with a child with a speech or language issue?
The best thing you can do for your child with a speech and language problem is read to them or read with them. So if you're working with a younger kiddo or a kiddo who really struggles with reading, then reading to them and sharing a book experience with them is going to be amazing. If you have an older kiddo who is actually able to read, sit down with them and share a book with them. Maybe if it's a student that likes to read by himself, you both read the same book. Let the child pick the book, but maybe you both read the book and then you come together and do kind of a book club and talk about it. Or maybe you take turns where the student reads a page and then you read a page and you kind of go back and forth that way. So sharing book activities, book experiences are really great, and then being able to talk about what's going on in the story. So asking the questions about what he or she read, what he or she understood, asking him to predict what he thinks is going to happen next, or making your own predictions. Just when we read a book, there's a whole inner dialogue that we are doing with ourselves. We're like, oh man, I can't believe that happened, or oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. Maybe he's going to do this, or oh my gosh, I bet he's the killer. That's definitely the killer. So we're doing all this inside our heads, and our children don't know how to do that. So if you do that out loud, then they have a really great model of how to interact with a book and understand what's going on and process the information.
Love that activity. Summer's coming up.
Yeah.
Any summer activity, like an activity or two you recommend to keep the student with a language and speech and language issue engaged in the summer?
What I would recommend for older children, I think you said your audience is mostly middle school, high school kiddos. For those kiddos, what I would recommend for great summer activities is to pursue that student's interest. So look at what your child really enjoys doing and see if you can engage the child in learning about that subject. So let's say your kiddo really loves to play video games constantly. You could go and help your child do research about what kind of job is a video game developer? What do they do? What's the mechanics behind how video games work? Or if they're more into kind of the storyline of the video game, get them engaged in stories that are similar to that storyline. So I know, like the Halo games, there are books that go along with that are fictional books about the characters from that game. So get your student involved in learning about something that he has an interest in. And if you get involved in that too, then he's going to see that you're caring about what he's interested in and you're helping him learn more. And then you can always work speech and language skills into that learning. So you can talk about different vocabulary words that surround that topic. You can talk about how you can have them read something and then talk about their comprehension of what they read and ask them questions, have them answer questions about the subject. So as long as you're using their interest, they're going to be excited about it and keep wanting to do it, as opposed to you saying, hey, it's time for us to sit down and work on grammar. Because I bet you're going to get some resistance from that.
Absolutely. You have a ton of activity on your website, activities, worksheets, and materials on your site, but you also have some products for purchase. Can you talk about those?
Yes, I am selling a couple ebooks on my website right now. I have one that has some lesson plans and activities for basic speech and language skills. So that would be things like using grammatical markers, answering WH questions, following directions, some of those basic skills. So if you have a kiddo who's working on some of those basic skills, that would be good. I also have a book that is step-by-step how to teach a new sound. So if a child is struggling to say a specific sound, there's a book on there that is all about how to do that and gives you all the materials that you would need to do that. And then I have one for late talkers as well, which would be a toddler or preschooler age child who is not yet talking or not yet using very many words.
Awesome. And what's next for speechandlanguagekids.com?
Well, right now I'm working on a book on apraxia, childhood apraxia of speech, which is a rare neurogenic speech disorder. So it's one that is pretty rare, but there's not a whole lot of information on it. So I'm putting together, I can't decide if it's going to be a book or a course. I'm still working on getting that piece together. And then I have a membership site part of my website that is for speech therapists, and I'm trying to offer training and help to speech therapists who are struggling with their position or some of the students on their caseload.
And what's the most rewarding part of your work?
I love the emails I get from people telling me how much I've helped either their child or helped them in their job. I also love that I get emails from people all over the world. So I will get emails from somebody that'll say, hey, I'm in this very small country that no one's ever heard of, and I'm the only speech therapist for my entire country, and there's nothing here, so thank you for your material. So I love getting stories like that and stories from parents of like, hey, I tried this and it worked, and now my kid can do that. And it's just very rewarding.
That's awesome. And to any kids or teens listening to the podcast, any advice before they cross to that next phase in their life, whether it's young adulthood, college, then high school?
I would say, kind of going along with my theme of speech therapy, if you are having some concerns about your communication skills, if you feel like you're not communicating well with others, if you feel like you sound different than other people when you communicate, I think it's very important for you to ask for help. So talk to your parents about it. Just have an open conversation about what you're experiencing. There are speech therapists in your school who would be more than happy to help you. You can stop by after school and talk to that person, and they would be able to give you some advice. Or, start looking stuff up online. Just make sure that you are checking your sources with a trusted adult. So if you are looking up something, let's say you have a list and you want information about lists, go ahead and look up some stuff online, but have an adult help you so that you know that you're finding good information, because there's also a lot of really sketchy information out on the internet too. So make sure that you're having an adult help you find the best information, and then just do what you can to get some help.
Amazing. Well, Carrie Clark, thanks for coming on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be on.
And this wraps up our show today with Carrie Clark. Go to www.speechandlanguagekids.com to learn more about Carrie's amazing online resource for students with speech and language challenges. And make sure you check out episode 71. We'll be doing our next tutoring tips episode. And make sure to check out our podcast page to get all of our episodes. preppedandpolished.com/podcast. Thank you for joining us on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Now go out there and take control of your education.
You've been listening to the Prepped and Polished podcast. For more information, check out preppedandpolished.com. Also, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.